So Amy, tell us about what Palmetto Cycling Coalition's mission is.
So the Palmetto Cycling Coalition, we also call ourselves the PCC. We are the advocacy organization at a statewide level. There are lots of local organizations, and we work towards improving the safety for bicyclists on the roadway at the state level. And we do that through working with the South Carolina Department of Transportation with regard to road design. We also work with lots of different groups in trying to improve the behavior of bicyclists and also motorists on the roadway, because the behavior is also a big has a big impact on the safety of bicyclists in addition to street design.
Okay, and as part of what the coalition does, y'all work to have laws passed to make the roadways safer for bicyclists. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
In looking at these laws, and they're in Title 56, Chapter 5, Article 27, the South Carolina bicycling laws, there are two that I thought were incredibly important in terms of law enforcement knowing that they exist, and those are the safe distance and anti-harassment. Why don't you tell us about those?
But both of those laws were actually recently passed in 2007, and those laws are very important towards improving the safety of bicyclists. The motorist, because the motorist is operating the vehicle that is up to 1, 2, or 3 tons, they have a lot of responsibility in terms of, and also a lot of the power in having an impact on the safety of the bicyclist. The bicyclist has a 20-pound vehicle, and so what that law did is it placed the clear onus of responsibility of maintaining that safe passing distance on the motor vehicle driver. And there's other laws also, due care laws, which also are used as to substantiate that too.
That the car must operate a safe distance from the bicyclist, but my understanding is you didn't specifically want a particular distance stated. Why is that?
Well, to state a specific distance can, in some cases, not really characterize what really is safe, because if you have a kid that is on a neighborhood street, and if he or she has been taught to ride as far to the right as practicable, which is another part of that law, then if the kid is on the right hand side, a kid will typically need a lot more than 3 feet to be safe, because kids don't ride in a straight line. Bicycles in general are different from motor vehicles in that they're going to waver a little bit, but a kid on a bike is going to waver even more. So in other words, a kid might need a little more.
Right, so a safe distance really depends on the exact situation.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay, what about the anti-harassment statute?
So the anti-harassment statute actually makes it a misdemeanor if a driver of a motor vehicle harasses either verbally or otherwise, or taunts verbally or otherwise, or if the driver throws an object at a bicyclist, which actually happens a lot more often than people think. And even if proof can't be established and there isn't a conviction on that, it's still something that it's super helpful for police officers to follow up with those
any complaints they might have.
Right, so that a record can be established, or a pattern of behavior on certain folks that might build a case in the future, or add some characterization for another charge later that can be proved.
Right, and there's also, in terms of for law enforcement specifically, a prohibition as to parking with regard to bicycle lanes. Tell us a little bit about that.
So a bicycle lane is it's something that's between 4 and 5 and 6, sometimes 7 feet up in Greenville. And so a bike lane is for the dedicated use for bicyclists to help them have a separated space that vehicles are not allowed into, and so not just moving vehicles but parked vehicles. And so if a bicyclist is traveling in a bicycle lane, they should have legally the correct assumption that lane is going to be continuous until sometimes lanes will end, but if there's a vehicle in that lane, it's very dangerous. It's just like having a parked vehicle in a motor vehicle lane.
And so, in other words, parking in that lane is going to be prohibited, right?
Right.
Okay. In terms of the responsibilities for bicyclists, I think it's important for law enforcement to know what those are, because if they see somebody who's operating their bicycle in an unsafe manner, they could certainly inform them of the appropriate manner in which to operate the bicycle. So let's talk a little bit about where a bicyclist is supposed to ride.
Great, and I'm glad that you asked this question. It's very important. Bicyclists have lots of responsibilities on the roadway to help maintain their own safety as well, not just the driver of a heavy motor vehicle. And there's a lot that they can do. And anytime a police officer can issue a warning, on the fly, if they don't have time to actually write them a ticket, we highly encourage that, because there's a lot of education that doesn't occur, because none of this is required in schools. It's not required in driver's ed classes. There are a few questions on to get your license to operate a motor vehicle. There's a few questions on that exam, but in large part, bicyclists and motor vehicle drivers are largely unaware. So just to encourage, giving these tips is very important. But where they can ride, they can in any
any roadway.
In any roadway or any non-restricted access highway, they can ride in. They can also ride on the sidewalks, and there are only local ordinances that actually restrict where they can ride on those. Like in certain areas in certain cities, they can't ride on sidewalks, but in large part they can.
And in terms of riding in a particular lane, are they supposed to stay to one side or the other more so than?
Right, they're supposed to stay as far to the right as practicable, but if their intended direction is not straight, if they're going to turn left, then they can maneuver with a hand signal to the left-hand side of the lane in order to put themselves in a position to make that left-hand turn.
In terms of bicyclists who are riding together, are there any special rules insofar as how many can ride side by side or anything of that nature?
So in South Carolina, they cannot ride any more than two abreast. So that's two side by side. If they're riding single file, that's fine. If they ride two abreast, that's fine. Two side by side. If they're riding 3 and 4 and 5, that's illegal. They're not supposed to do that.
Okay, so 2 is the maximum.
Right, and it's actually in some cases it's safer to ride in rows of 2 instead of single file.
All right, and what about signaling and turns? What are the requirements for those?
So bicyclists are required legally to signal prior to making turns, and they are, in order to turn right, there's one way that they can, there's 3 options for them. There's one option to turn left. To turn left, they would signal with their arm extended to the left straight out. To turn right, there's 3 different ways. They can do the same as the other side and just signal by extending the arm straight out to the right, or they can take their left hand and make an L shape. That also signals right. They can also put their left arm straight up. That's the 3rd way to signal right.
Okay, and my understanding is that there's a change in terms of the signaling. It used to be that signaling had to be continuous, and now that's not the case. Just briefly, why is that?
So the reason why that was amended is because while maneuvering through an intersection, it's a lot safer to have both hands on the handlebar. And so if you take a hand off the handlebar, it's gonna make your entire maneuver feel unsteady.
Right. So a safety factor in terms of the signaling doesn't have to be continuous, right?
Right, it does not. But at some point they do need to signal, and what they should be doing is signaling early instead of waiting till the last minute.
All right. And there's also some prohibitions about clinging to cars. Obviously, law enforcement would want to be looking at that. Bicyclists are not to be clinging to cars. What about the statute that goes as to bicyclists carrying items?
So that statute is a little bit fuzzy, but what it states is that you cannot carry an item if it's going to prevent you from appropriately maneuvering your bicycle. If you have to take a hand off the handlebar and you're unsteady, then you cannot
and so law
carry the
enforcement
object.
should approach a bicyclist that's engaged in that type activity to inform them that that is
Right.
unsafe, right?
Right, but there's also a lot of folks that use bicycles for utility, perhaps even more than those that use it for recreation. And so there's a lot of, a lot of times there's going to be a need to carry things on the bicycle.
And finally, with regard to the lights and reflectors that are required to be on bicycles, what can you tell us about that?
So they have to have a front light. Legally, the statute requires them to have a front light, but it does not require them to have a rear light. They only have to have a rear reflector.
Okay.
In terms of safety, we actually always recommend that they have a rear light, but legally, they're only required to have a front light and a rear reflector. There's some distance requirements in there too.
I believe the front lights has to be seen 500 feet, and then the rear reflector 50 feet to 300 feet.
Between
Does that
50 and
sound right?
300, yes.
Okay. Very good. Now, if anybody would have any questions for you here at the Palmetto Cycling Coalition, can you tell us your contact information?
Sure. They can email me at amy@pccsc.net. They can also call us on the phone here at 803-445-1099. And we highly encourage folks law enforcement to contact us. We think that a good relationship with law enforcement is pretty key towards the safety of everyone on the roadway, especially these vulnerable road users.